Okay, so get this, right? We're diving into this YouTube video, and it claims that Canada is being liquidated and absorbed into the USA.
Hmm.
And the method, something like probate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you heard right, probate.
Probate's usually for handling someone's estate after they pass away, not for an entire country.
Right.
It's a pretty wild idea applying it to a nation state.
It is. Our source is this video titled Canada in Probate, and let me tell you, the claims are intense.
Yeah,
So we're going a deep dive to see if there's any truth to this whole thing.
it's definitely a head scratcher.
Yeah.
The video claims that Canada is in some kind of legal process being prepped for absorption into the U.S.,
Uh,
and it even gives a time frame, January to March 2025.
January to March 2025. Is that like a deadline or something?
Yeah.
What makes those 3 months so important?
That's where the speculation gets murky.
Okay.
The video doesn't offer hard evidence for this timeline, but it tries to create the sense of urgency, like something big is about to go down.
Okay, so let's talk about the who's who in this alleged plan. The video mentions Mark Carney, former head honcho of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England.
Yeah.
They're saying he's the executor of Canada's probate.
That's right, like the person who manages a will.
Okay.
The video uses examples of probate procedures for individuals and tries to scale that up to a national level.
So because banks need probate to release funds from a deceased person's account, they're saying the same logic applies to a whole country's assets.
It seems that way, but there's a huge leap in logic there. It's
Yeah.
like saying, since I need a passport to travel to another country, my whole neighborhood needs a collective passport to move to a new continent.
Right.
The scales just don't match.
I see what you're saying. It doesn't really hold up.
Yeah.
But why Mark Carney specifically? What makes him the chosen one for this executor role?
The video emphasizes Carney's background in asset-backed securities and suggests that's key to his supposed role.
Okay.
Imagine someone bundling up all of Canada's resources, oil, timber, you name it, and selling shares of that bundle to investors. That's kind of what asset-backed securities are.
Okay.
Though obviously this is a huge oversimplification of complex financial instruments.
Okay, so they're suggesting Carney would be managing this massive sell-off of Canada's assets.
It seems so.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But even if that were happening, wouldn't there be some signs? Like market fluctuations, government announcements, something?
You'd think so, right? A move of that magnitude would be incredibly difficult to keep secret.
Yeah.
You'd see major economic shifts, political maneuvering, probably a whole lot of media frenzy.
Yeah.
But there's no real evidence of any of that happening.
So it's more about tapping into people's fears and anxieties than presenting a solid case.
It seems that way.
Okay.
This video plays into a broader anxiety we see about globalization and loss of national identity.
Right.
It feeds this fear of shadowy figures making backroom deals to reshape the world order.
So it's more about fueling those anxieties than providing concrete evidence.
Exactly.
Like-
The video creates a sense of urgency and impending doom without actually backing it up.
Right.
It's a classic case of fear-mongering disguised as inside information.
Speaking of inside information, let's dig into some of the other claims the video makes.
Okay.
It uses terms like testator and executor, legal jargon that most people probably aren't familiar with.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us?
Sure. In a typical probate situation, the testator is the person who made the will,
Mm-hmm.
and the executor is the one carrying out those wishes.
Right.
Now, the video tries to apply this to Canada,
Okay.
suggesting Queen Elizabeth II, before her death, appointed Carney as the executor to manage Canada's estate.
Wait, hold on. Even if we entertain this wild idea, wouldn't there be legal hurdles to jump over?
I would think so.
Canada's a sovereign nation, not someone's personal property to be bequeathed.
Right.
And wouldn't the Canadian government have a say in all this?
You'd think, but the video glosses over those complexities. It just throws out the assertion without addressing the legal realities of how authority and succession work,
Okay.
both in Canada and the UK.
So they're conveniently ignoring those inconvenient details.
It seems so.
What about the fact that Mark Carney isn't even Canadian? Wouldn't that disqualify him from being an executor if we're going by their logic?
That's where the video tries to use probate law to its advantage.
Okay.
It mentions that under certain conditions, a non-resident can act as an executor,
Okay.
using things like administration bonds or waivers from beneficiaries.
So they're trying to create a legal loophole to fit their narrative.
Essentially, yes, they're cherry-picking bits of probate law and twisting them to fit this grand scheme.
Right.
It's like taking rules from a board game and trying to apply them to a real-life political situation.
Right.
The contexts are just completely different.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah.
Lots of big claims,
Yeah.
selective use of legal jargon, and not a lot of concrete evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
What else does this video try to pull out of its hat?
Well, they bring up something called the International Wills Convention,
Uh-huh.
which Canada is a signatory to.
Yep.
Basically, it's an agreement between countries to simplify the process of recognizing wills made in different jurisdictions.
So if someone makes a will in, say, France,
Right.
other countries who sign this convention would recognize it as valid.
Exactly.
Wow.
But the video takes a huge leap from recognizing international wills to suggesting an entire country can be treated as an estate subject to a will.
Right.
It's a classic case of taking a grain of truth and stretching it into a whole field of speculation.
It's like they're playing a game of connect the dots, but the dots are from different pictures entirely.
Yeah, it's a stretch.
What about the impact on First Nations? The video mentions them as well.
Yes. This is where the video's oversimplification becomes problematic.
Okay.
It claims that since First Nations, treaties were originally made with the British Crown,
Uh-huh.
and the Crown is supposedly being subsumed by the U.S. in this scenario,
Right?
the legal standing of those treaties would shift.
Whoa, hold on a second.
Yeah.
First Nations treaties are incredibly complex legal documents with deep historical and cultural significance.
Absolutely.
To just brush over them like it feels incredibly dismissive.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of using a complex and sensitive issue to prop up a flimsy argument without understanding the nuances and realities of the situation.
Okay, so far we've got a video claiming Canada is being liquidated, absorbed into the U.S., orchestrated by Mark Carney, all based on some pretty shaky interpretations of probate law and international agreements.
That's a pretty accurate summary.
Yeah.
The video relies heavily on speculation, legal jargon, and a healthy dose of fear-mongering to craft its narrative.
It's like a legal thriller movie, except it's being presented as fact.
Exactly, and that's where critical thinking becomes so important.
Right.
Just because someone throws around legal terms and sounds confident doesn't mean their claims are accurate or valid.
So how do we separate fact from fiction in a situation like this? How do we know what to believe?
That's what we're here for. We'll break down the claims, analyze the evidence, and help you understand the legal concepts at play.
And most importantly, we'll help you develop those critical thinking skills so you can spot these kinds of claims in the wild and navigate the information landscape with confidence.
Exactly. So stick with us as we delve deeper into this Canada in probate video and see if there's any truth to this wild story.
Sounds good.
All right.
Do it.
It's interesting how the video tries to connect this probate idea to current events.
Yeah.
It mentions the prorogation of Canada's parliament, making it sound like that's evidence of the country being in this legal limbo.
Yeah, that part caught my attention too.
Right.
It almost sounded like they were saying because Parliament wasn't in session, Canada was somehow incapacitated, ripe for the taking.
Right, but prorogation is a normal parliamentary procedure.
Okay.
Think of it like putting a TV show on pause.
Right.
The story isn't over, it's
Yeah.
just on hold for a bit.
So the government can still function? Laws are still in effect? It's not like everything just grinds to a halt?
Exactly, but the video uses this term prorogation to create a sense of alarm as if something sinister is afoot.
Right.
It's a classic example of taking a normal event and twisting it to fit a predetermined narrative.
It's a bit like those hidden messages people claim to find in movies and songs.
Oh, yeah.
You can make anything sound suspicious if you take it out of context and add a spooky soundtrack.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to have a basic understanding of these processes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's easy to get swept up in the fear-mongering.
Okay, so we've talked about probate procedures, the role of the executor, the International Wills Convention, even the prorogation of Parliament.
Right.
But what about this claim that Canada is being liquidated? What exactly does the video mean by that?
Well, the video uses the term liquidation rather loosely.
Okay.
It seems to imply that Canada's assets are being secretly sold off or transferred as part of this probate process.
But it doesn't offer any specifics, right? Like there's no mention of which assets are being sold, who's buying them, no evidence of any actual transactions taking place.
Exactly. If Canada were being liquidated on a scale large enough to fulfill this theory, there would be massive economic repercussions, market volatility, news reports, government statements, the whole nine yards.
That's crickets.
Right.
Nothing.
It's one of those things that sounds alarming on the surface,
Right.
but falls apart under scrutiny.
It's like that saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
Or in this case, if it sounds too crazy to be true.
Exactly. And this video plays into a very specific kind of fear.
Yeah.
It taps into a sense of helplessness, this idea that powerful forces are operating behind the scenes, manipulating events,
Right.
and there's nothing we can do about it.
That's a pretty bleak outlook.
Yeah.
But is there any truth to this idea that legal systems can be used to manipulate events on a global scale?
Well, that's where things get a little more nuanced. While this specific video relies heavily on speculation and misrepresentation,
Hmm.
there is a broader trend of using legal jargon and complex legal frameworks to create a facade of legitimacy for actions that might be ethically questionable.
So it's like using the language of the law to make something sound more official, even if it's not actually legitimate.
Precisely, and it can be very effective because most people don't have the time or the expertise to dissect these complex legal arguments.
Yeah.
It creates a sort of information asymmetry where those in the know can use that to their advantage.
So it's almost like a form of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Those who understand the legal complexities hold the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
Right.
And everyone else is left trying to decipher the code.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's something we see in various contexts, not just international politics.
It reminds me of those contracts with pages of fine print that nobody actually reads.
Oh, absolutely.
You just kind of assume everything is above board because it's all legal sounding.
Right. Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be critical of the information we consume, to question the source, to look for evidence,
Right.
and to be wary of claims that rely on fear and complexity to persuade.
So it's not just about understanding the specific claims in this video.
Right.
It's about developing a broader sense of media literacy.
Absolutely. It's about being able to spot the patterns, to identify the tactics being used,
Yeah.
and to make informed judgments about the information we're being presented with.
So let's apply that to this video.
Okay.
What are some red flags we can look for when evaluating claims like these?
Well, one major red flag is the lack of concrete evidence.
Okay.
The video makes bold assertions about Canada being liquidated, Mark Carney acting as an executor,
Right.
but doesn't offer any documentation, financial records, official statements, or any other verifiable source to back up these claims.
It's all just conjecture and speculation.
Exactly, and that's another red flag.
Oh.
Heavy reliance on speculation. The video connects dots that aren't necessarily connected, drawing conclusions based on assumptions and interpretations rather than hard facts.
It's like they're building a house of cards and any slight breeze could knock it all down.
Another thing to watch out for is the use of emotionally charged language.
Okay.
The video uses terms like liquidation, absorption, secret deals,
Right.
words designed to evoke fear and anxiety.
It's like they're trying to create a sense of panic to get people riled up without actually providing a solid basis for those feelings.
Exactly. It's a tactic often used in propaganda and misinformation campaigns.
So what about this idea of a country being in probate? Is that even a thing? Could a nation, theoretically speaking, undergo a process similar to probate?
That's where things get really interesting.
Right.
While this video's application of probate to a nation state is highly speculative and legally dubious,
Right.
it does raise some thought-provoking questions.
Love
For
it.
instance, what if, hypothetically speaking, a country were to undergo a process similar to probate?
Whoa. Mind blown. I never even considered that possibility.
It's certainly uncharted territory, but it's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah.
If we were to entertain this hypothetical scenario, it would raise a whole host of complex legal and political issues.
Like who would have the authority to initiate such a process?
Exactly. And how would the assets of a nation be valued and distributed? What would happen to its citizens, its laws, its international treaties?
That's a lot to unpack, and I imagine the implications would be huge, potentially reshaping the entire global landscape.
It would be a legal and political earthquake, for sure, but for now, it remains purely hypothetical.
Right. It's important to remember that we're not saying Canada is secretly being liquidated and absorbed into the U.S.
Absolutely not. We're simply using this video as a starting point to explore some broader themes about information literacy, critical thinking, and the use of legal frameworks to manipulate narratives.
It's a reminder that we need to be savvy consumers of information, to question what we see and hear, and to develop the skills necessary to navigate a world where misinformation can spread with alarming speed and ease.
Well said, and on that note, let's turn our attention to one of the most concerning aspects of this video,
Okay.
the potential impact on First Nations communities.
Right. The video makes this sweeping statement about First Nations treaties being subject to this supposed transfer of authority to the U.S.
Yeah.
But as we mentioned earlier, First Nations treaties are incredibly complex and deeply significant documents.
They are.
They can't just be brushed aside as a footnote in this grand conspiracy theory.
Exactly. It's crucial to understand that First Nations treaties are nation-to-nation agreements with a unique legal and historical context that goes far beyond what this video presents.
So to suggest that these treaties would simply become null and void or automatically transferred to the U.S. is not only inaccurate, but also deeply disrespectful to the sovereignty of First Nations.
Absolutely. The video's attempt to shoehorn this complex issue into its narrative is a classic example of how misinformation can flatten important nuances and erase the voices and perspectives of those most affected.
It's a reminder that we need to be very careful about accepting narratives that oversimplify complex issues and fail to consider the perspectives of all involved, especially when those narratives are based on fear and speculation rather than facts and evidence.
Well said. So where does this leave us?
Yeah.
We've explored this claim that Canada is in probate, examined the evidence or lack thereof,
Right.
and delved into some pretty complex legal concepts.
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway for our listener?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Don't just accept information at face value, especially when it comes from sources with unclear motives or agendas.
Absolutely.
Question everything, do your research, and be wary of claims that rely on fear, speculation, or overly simplistic explanations.
And if you encounter something that seems too outlandish to be true,
It probably is.
it probably is, but even when debunking these kinds of claims,
Yeah.
there's always something to be learned.
Right.
In this case, we've explored some fascinating legal concepts, gained insights into how misinformation spreads, and hopefully spark some critical thinking in our listeners.
Absolutely. And it's that critical thinking that will help us navigate the increasingly complex information landscape and separate fact from fiction.
Well said, and remember,
Yeah.
if a nation could theoretically undergo a process similar to probate,
Right.
what a fascinating legal puzzle that would be.
It would be.
But for now, we'll leave that to the legal scholars to ponder.
Agreed. We've done our due diligence, debunked some myths, and hopefully given our listener plenty to think about.
We may not have all the answers, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Curiosity is a journey, not a destination.
I like that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody.
We'll see you next time.
You know, it's interesting how this video tries to frame the whole situation as if it's like this big conspiracy. It really does, yeah. And it plays on a lack of understanding about how governments and international relations actually work, you know?
Exactly. It makes it sound like countries can be traded back and forth like baseball cards.
Right, as if there's like some secret global marketplace where nations are being bought and sold without their citizens even knowing.
And that's where the danger lies, right?
Yeah.
This idea that we're all just pawns in some elaborate game being played by unseen forces.
Exactly. It creates a sense of powerlessness and distrust,
Yeah.
which can be very damaging to a society.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that even though international relations can be complex, they are still governed by laws, treaties, and diplomacy.
Not just by some shadowy figures making backroom deals.
Right. And while there are certainly cases of corruption and manipulation, those are usually the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the claims, the lack of evidence, the potential motivations behind this video, but what about the potential impact? Like if people start believing this stuff, what could happen?
Well, one of the most concerning aspects is the potential erosion of trust in institutions. If people believe that their government is secretly being liquidated, that their leaders are part of some grand conspiracy, it can lead to a breakdown of social cohesion and a sense of hopelessness.
Right.
And that can have, real-world consequences, right? People might disengage from the political process, become more susceptible to extremist ideologies, or even resort to violence.
So what can we as individuals do to combat this trend of misinformation?
Well, the first step is awareness, right? Be aware of the tactics being used, the emotional triggers being pulled, the lack of evidence often presented.
Don't just accept things at face value, especially when they come from sources with a clear agenda.
Right. The next step is verification.
Okay.
If something sounds too outlandish to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
Take the time to fact-check claims, to seek out reliable sources, to cross-reference information.
Right.
There are plenty of resources available to help you verify information online.
And if you're not sure about something, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly. Talk to experts,
Yes.
consult reliable sources, engage in healthy debate.
Yeah.
And finally, be mindful of what you share online.
Right?
Don't contribute to the spread of misinformation by sharing unverified claims or sensationalized content.
Right.
Take a moment to pause, reflect, and consider the potential consequences before hitting that share button.
It's like that old saying, think before you speak, or in this case, think before you share.
Exactly. We all have a responsibility to be mindful of the information we consume and share, especially in an age where misinformation can spread so rapidly.
Like a digital wildfire.
Yeah.
Once it starts, it can be incredibly difficult to contain.
And the damage can be just as real.
Right.
So let's all do our part to be responsible digital citizens, to promote critical thinking, and to ensure that the information we share is accurate and trustworthy.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've done a pretty thorough deep dive into this Canada and probate video.
Yeah.
We've explored the claims, debunked the myths, and hopefully equipped our listeners with the tools they need to navigate the wild world of online information.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
We may not have all the answers, but we've certainly raised some important questions and highlighted the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and responsible information sharing.
So for those of you listening, remember to stay curious, stay informed, and always question what you see and hear online.
And if you encounter something that seems too crazy to be true, well, it probably is.
Words to live by. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.